In 1944, deep in Nazi-occupied France, a young American soldier was shot through the chest. Left for dead by both friend and foe, he didn't crawl, he walked. Over 100 miles. Alone, bleeding, and somehow alive. His name was Private Thomas Reece. He wasn't a Special Forces hero or a decorated officer. Just a 19-year-old with a letter from home in one pocket and a bullet in his lung. His mission? Survive the impossible. This isn't a legend. It's a declassified mission log. A true story of grit, pain, and a journey no man should have survived. And it begins with a whisper. I think I'm still alive. The ambush came fast. His unit was crossing a vineyard near to when the first MG-42 opened fire. Screams. Dirt flying. Bullets snapping past his ears. Then an impact. His world folded inward. He dropped behind a tractor wheel and knew he'd been shot. The bullet tore clean through his right lung. He couldn't scream. Couldn't breathe. He reached for a morphine syringe in his vest, but his fingers barely worked. His squad was retreating. No one saw him go down. Night fell. Rain poured. Rats sniffed near his boots. But he didn't die. Not that night. When the pain peaked, he passed out. When it eased, he got up, staggered, and started walking. One foot, then the other, toward nothing, just away from death. He didn't know which way was safe. Every village could hide a sniper. Every farmhouse, a German patrol. But something kept him moving, pain, adrenaline, or sheer madness. His only compass was instinct. By dawn, his shirt was stuck to his chest, dry blood and torn flesh sealed like glue. Every breath was a knife. He found a crutch, a broken tree branch. Each step stabbed his lungs, but he forced 1 foot forward. He had no idea where he was, or if rescue was even possible. He followed old farm roads, ducked behind stone fences, and hid when planes flew overhead. Once, a German convoy passed less than 50 feet from him. He lay frozen in a ditch, chest barely rising, praying they wouldn't see the blood trail. Food was a fantasy. He drank from cattle troughs, gnawed raw turnips from abandoned fields. Once, he chewed on tree bark to keep from crying out. Every swallow felt like fire through his rib cage. But still he walked. By day 3, fever set in. He hallucinated. Saw his mother calling him from across a French orchard. He staggered toward her voice, collapsed beneath a cherry tree, and woke up covered in ants. The pain grounded him. I'm not dead, he whispered. The road took him through ghost villages. Entire towns emptied after bombings. No sound, no smoke, just shattered windows and prayer candles. He limped through a church with a hole in the ceiling and sat at the altar, whispering. Just a little further. One night, he found a mirror in a burned-out house. He didn't recognize himself. Sunken cheeks, lips cracked, eyes yellow with infection. The wound was festering, oozing black. He stared at it and laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. Then came the dog. A mutt, gray, muzzled in dirt. It didn't bark, just watched him from behind a fence, then trotted ahead. He followed it, partly out of hope, partly out of delirium. The dog would lead him toward something. He prayed it wasn't death. The dog led him through hedgerows and past wrecked vehicles. At one point, they passed a downed glider, a ghost of the D-Day invasion. Inside were torn parachutes, spent rounds, and the smell of something long dead. He didn't stop, not even to mourn. That night, he crawled into a hayloft in a collapsed barn. His breathing had grown wet. Every inhale gurgled like water through a cracked pipe. He couldn't lie flat, couldn't cough. He stuffed cloth into his mouth just to stop the noise of dying. On day 5, he crossed a shallow stream and fell. Couldn't get back up. Lay there face down in cold water, eyes open. A voice in his head said, "This is it." But then the dog barked. Just once. Loud, like a slap, and he moved. He dragged himself from that stream like a man pulling free from a grave. His skin was ice, his wound now green and oozing. He found a stick, tore fabric from his trousers, and tied his chest tight. Improvised medicine from a dying man. Finally, human voices. Not German, not shouting. English. American, but distant. He limped faster, waving a shredded sleeve. Then he heard it, a single rifle shot. They thought he was the enemy. He dropped behind a fence and screamed, "I'm an American!" A medic approached cautiously, rifle ready. "Jesus Christ," he muttered when he saw the wound. Reece collapsed at his feet. "Name's Thomas," he whispered. "I've been walking." Then everything turned black. When he woke up, he was clean, warm, hooked to morphine and bandages. The army doctor said he'd walked over 100 miles across German territory, alone, with a bullet through his lung. The first thing Reece asked was, "Did the dog make it?" The doctors called it miraculous. One said the bullet should have drowned him in his own blood. Another said walking that far with collapsed lung was physiologically impossible. But Reece didn't feel like a miracle. He felt hollow. He spent weeks in recovery. His body began to mend, but his eyes stayed distant. Nurses joked he didn't blink much. He stared at the tent walls like he expected them to collapse. When asked how he survived, he'd shrug. Didn't want to die in the mud. One morning, a nurse brought him a box. Inside was a muddy helmet, a tattered map, and a single dog tag that wasn't his. She said a local child had followed a gray dog to the wreckage and found it near a tree. Reece cried for the first time since the bullet, not because of pain, but because someone or something had walked with him through hell and then vanished into the trees. Maybe the dog was real. Maybe it wasn't, but it saved him either way. He asked to return to his unit, but command refused. "You've earned your way home," they said. "You've done more than anyone should have survived." But Reece didn't want home, not yet. He couldn't leave until the war was over or until he stopped waking up in mud. So they reassigned him to a signals unit far behind the front lines. Safe, clean. He copied codes, sorted cables, typed endless reports. But every night he walked the perimeter, alone, one hand always near his chest. Word of his story spread. Some soldiers didn't believe it. Others treated him like a myth. The guy who walked 100 miles with a hole in his chest. But Reece didn't care about the legend. He only cared about the quiet, and whether the dog would ever return. One day, a high-ranking officer came through the base. "You Reece?" he asked. "Heard you got guts." Literally. Reece didn't laugh. He just nodded. The officer dropped a file on the desk, a supply run deep behind friendly lines. "You up for it?" The next morning, Reece was on a jeep with 2 medics and a crate of plasma. The road was rough, but familiar. Fields, hedgerows, ruins. He leaned out the window, scanning every fence line and treetop. His heart beat slower than it used to, but louder. Halfway through, the jeep hit a mine. It flipped. Fire. Screams. Reece was thrown clear. He limped toward the wreckage, his side bleeding again. He dragged one medic out, alive. The other didn't move. Just like that, he was alone again. He had a choice. Wait for rescue or carry the plasma the rest of the way. He strapped it to his back and started walking. Again, with a new wound, new smoke in his lungs, and the same silence in his head. It was deja vu cracked ribs. A low sun, blood dripping into his boot. But this time he knew the cost and chose it anyway, because somewhere ahead a soldier was waiting. And he wasn't going to die just because Reece had already done his part. At mile 12, he passed a farmhouse. A boy stepped out, holding a crust of bread. Didn't say a word, just handed it over, eyes wide. Reece nodded once, took a bite, and kept walking. That's all it took to believe in people again. He delivered the plasma before sunset. The medic at the forward post blinked at him. "You carried this?" "Like this." Reece grinned through blood and dust. "What can I say? I've got a habit of not dying." They gave him another medal. His second. "You're a damn mule, Reece," one officer joked. "Made of bones and stubborn." Reece smiled politely, but inside, he didn't feel like a hero. Just a man who refused to sit still while others bled. When the war ended, they offered to send him home early. He declined. Instead, he walked from town to town, helping rebuild bridges, bury the fallen, and teach local kids how to read English road signs. It wasn't about war anymore. It was about walking forward. Back home, he avoided parades, didn't wear his uniform. He bought a pair of boots and started hiking. Mountains, trails, rivers. Every scar on his body pulled with each step. But that was the point. He walked not to escape the war, but to remember surviving it. Years later, a reporter tracked him down, asked about the 100-mile man. Reece laughed for the first time in a while. "I wasn't counting miles," he said. "I was just trying to stay upright." The headline still read, "The Man Who Wouldn't Die." He kept the dog tag, wore on a chain around his neck until the day he died. No name, no unit, just scratched metal and silence. Some said the dog was a ghost, others a miracle. Reece never gave an answer, only a nod. At his funeral, there were no rifles, no bugles, just his boots, his helmet, and a trail map folded on his chest. A young soldier gave a eulogy. He taught us that survival isn't luck, it's motion. You just keep walking, no matter what's inside you. And somewhere, they say, a gray dog still walks the French woods, quiet, watchful, waiting for the next man too stubborn to die, the next Reece. Because some ghosts don't haunt, they guide. Years passed. His story was retold in classrooms, whispered in boot camps, and scribbled in old military manuals. But Reece never gave speeches. When asked about the 100 miles, he'd just say, it wasn't courage, it was refusal. One autumn, he visited Normandy. The beach was quiet, wind brushing through the dunes. He walked barefoot to the shoreline, not to remember the killing, but to feel the ground beneath him again. At a nearby cemetery, he paused at a grave marked "Unknown Soldier." He placed a second dog tag there. The one found by the dog never matched to a name. He whispered, "Thanks for walking with me." He never wrote a book, never tried to go viral. The walk was his alone. What mattered wasn't how far he went, but that he didn't stop, because pain can bury you, but motion can dig you out. In his final years, he moved slower, steps more deliberate, but every day he walked, from mailbox to driveway, around the block, on a cane worn smooth from years of use. One neighbor said, "He's not walking to get somewhere, he's walking to remember he's still here." One winter, a new soldier knocked on his door. "You really walked that far?" he asked. Reece smiled. "I bled more than I walked, but I didn't stop, and that's all that matters in war or life." Before he died, Reece left a note. 4 words. Nothing fancy. Just this: keep walking. It heals. His boots were donated to a war museum. But the real journey? That lives in every man who chooses to stand, when every part of him wants to lie down. After Reece's death, a trail in Normandy was renamed in his honor. Locals called it Le Sentier du Fantôme, the Ghost Path. Hikers still walk it today, not knowing the full story. But some say they feel someone beside them when they're alone. Military doctors used this case for decades. Reece syndrome. They called it informally an example of mind overruling body. When new recruits asked if it was real, veterans answered, it was more than real. It was Reece. One letter found after his death simply read, "If you're reading this, you're still breathing. That means you've already won half the battle. So get up and walk." Every war has ghosts, but some don't haunt, some guide. In every patrol trudging forward, every medic pushing through fatigue, every wounded man taking one more step, there's a trace of him, a man with a bullet in his chest, and no quit in his soul. They say courage is loud, gunfire, battle cries, flags waving in smoke. But the loudest courage is often silent. It limps, it bleeds, it breathes shallow, and it refuses to lie down. Reece never wanted a statue, never wanted fame, just a trail, a memory, and the hope that someone else would keep going, not fast, not flawlessly, just forward. A man with a bullet in his chest walked 100 miles through war, rain, and silence, not because he was fearless, but because he refused to stop. And that is why his story still walks beside us.